welcome all of you to our Fashions of Downton Abbey evening. We have a wonderful lady here, Karen Antonowitz, who teaches the history of fashion at RISD. This is her third time that she's been back here with us. She volunteers her time to come in and show you all the wonderful things that fashion has to offer. She was here last year for the 100th anniversary of the Titanic, and she did the fashions of the Titanic era. She was here last year for the anniversary of Jane Austen, and she did the fashions of that period as well. So now we've been very fortunate to have her volunteer her time to come back and talk about the fashions of Downton Abbey and that time period. So I know everybody's kind of excited to get going on this, so I will give you Karen Antonowitz.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Before I begin, did anyone attend the Tea and Gossip last week? A couple of you. Well, I was here, and it was fabulous, and it was in this very room, and tea and pastries, and the real cups and saucers. It was just wonderful. And I mention it because the library, I think they're very good about doing these kinds of things here. I've heard jazz bands here in this room, and it's a wonderful opportunity to just come into your public library and, you know, yes, we still want to read books and we still want to check out books, but to have additional events, I think, is a wonderful thing. So try to attend those if you can, because they're always fabulous. Again, my name is Karen Antonovich, and I do teach at RISD in the evening program. I teach there 20th Century Fashion, but I also teach full-time at Bay State College in Boston, and I teach history of fashion there. I teach textiles and styling. So I went into the field because I love the clothing from the past. I always say I was born way too late. Of course, I'm not walking around in a corset. I don't know how I'd feel on those 100-degree days. If I had been wearing a corset, I might have been felt a little differently, but I do enjoy the way people lived. I like reading about it. I like hearing about it. I am a Jane Austen fan as well. I can't tell you how many times my husband has suffered through the end scenes of Sense and Sensibility and Pride and Prejudice. So he pretends he's not watching it, but he's reading, but he's watching it. He knows the lines too. So I wanted to try to do a number of things today. I know that you wouldn't be here if you weren't a Downton Abbey fan. So does everyone watch Downton Abbey regularly, like I do, and it's obsessed? Yes, okay. The cast of characters does a wonderful job. They dress beautifully. We can't wait to see what they wear next, but we're intrigued by the downstairs aspect too. And I didn't focus on them tonight because they're wearing clothes that we don't tend to see as exciting clothing compared to the people upstairs. So I'm focusing more on them, but they had to wear clothing too. It just wasn't embellished as it would have been for the Grantham family. As you know, though, we do have an exhibit here at the library about the real Downton Abbey, which is Highclere Castle. And there's a fabulous book, and this was referenced last week as well by our speakers, and it's Lady Almina and the Real Downton Abbey, written by the Countess of Carnarvon. And I'll tell you, fascinating people who lived there in the past and who live there now. So I'm going to begin by talking a little bit about them, and then I will get to the fashions of Downton Abbey in that period. Can we lower the lights a little bit? Do you know? Just because I want them to be able to see the screen as well as they can. This is Lady Almina, the Countess of Carnarvon. She was the 5th Countess. And thank you. Is that good? Everybody see okay? Great. Okay. Get my notes so that I make sure I have everything correctly. Okay. This period of time, Lady Almina was married in 1895. Okay, she was married to the 5th Earl of Carnarvon. Okay. She was the illegitimate daughter of Mr. de Rothschild, who, as we know, is synonymous with money. And she was illegitimate because he was willing to pay her way, so to speak. she was accepted into society, and she was able to marry this earl, this fifth earl, and became a countess. And what's wonderful about her is that she loved fashion. She really enjoyed wearing beautiful clothing, and because of the way she presented herself and the way she carried herself, and because she was beautiful, she was accepted more readily into society. It was sort of her calling card, or her ticket into society, if you will. It was easier for her because of the way she carried herself and because she had the money to buy the very best clothing. There was a gentleman, and usually I start my talks with this man. His name is Charles Frederick Worth. He was the first couturier in the middle of the 19th century. If you remember Empress Eugenie, who was married to Napoleon III, she was very beautiful, and she was considered sort of a fashionista of her time. And Charles Frederick Worth dressed her, and he was put on the map pretty much because he made couture clothing for her, and other wealthy people followed. Sometimes when you see period films, they will mention that clothing has been ordered from Worth. So if you know him, it also usually start with him, but we're starting a little later in the period. Even though she was married in 1895, as you know, Downton Abbey didn't start until 1912. That's the period that it's beginning in, is 1912. And it's a little bit different look, but I wanted to show you how the looks change over time. This is her husband, the fifth Earl. He was born in 1866, died in 1923. And what makes him so very famous is he, along with Mr. Howard Carter, discovered King Tut's tomb in 1922. And why is that important? Well, it's important for many reasons. But when we start to talk about the 20s a little bit later tonight, you'll see what a big influence that discovery of the tomb was on not only the fashion of the period, but the architecture, accessories, jewelry, etc. That geometric look of Art Deco was very highly related to the Egyptian era as well. So you'll see that correlation when we get there. So that's Mr. Carter and the Earl. This lady, of course, she's up here. This very picture is behind the screen in the exhibit case. And this is Catherine Wendell, and she married the sixth Earl of Carnarvon. And George Edward is his name. And they called him Porchy for short because he was Lord Porchester. So that was his nickname. So he married Catherine, and that's, of course, he is the son of Almina and the fifth Earl, and he becomes the sixth Earl of Carnarvon. Notice this was the 20s, so you're going to see completely different, if you look back at this picture and you look at the tight corseting, I'm going to show you how that happened. But it loosened up quite a bit in the 20s. And there you go. Okay, we have to pepper in the cast of Downton Abbey. I can't just show you slides of clothing from the period without showing you the cast, because these are the people we're obsessed with. We feel that we know them, don't we? We feel that we're friends with them, or maybe they're part of our family. I know I talk to them like a crackpot on the screen, and you know, I'm going back and forth with them, and they're just intriguing. And so I thought it would be nice to just show you, this is the full cast of that first season. And I'm sure you all have your favorite characters, as do I. And you get very upset when somebody is no longer on the show for various reasons. I know I was very upset after season 3 ended, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So that's the cast of season 1. Now they're going to be in, this is outdoor clothing over their regular garments, so it's tougher to tell what the fashion really looked like under that, but you will see that. And these are the real servants of Downton Abbey. Can everybody see this okay? Everybody see? Okay. These are the servants of Highclere Castle from an early period, and this is from their archives, and I just thought it would be nice to show the real workers, the people who really were servants of the Carnarvon earls and their countesses. Okay, how did Almina dress? Well, picture yourself, ladies, not gentlemen, I don't think, having your shape molded, rather than putting a dress on and having that dress make sure it fits you, you make sure you fit the dress by wearing foundation garments that are so structured, they actually make your body move and stay in certain positions. And this particular one is called the S-curve, S-shape or S-curve silhouette. And what that does is push a lady's breasts forward and push the rear end back. So you're highlighting both ends. You can see what's going on in the front. That's coming forward, and the back end is jutting out, and that was the idea. So the corset was actually boned that way. I've never tried one on. I would just like to see what it feels like. It hurts me to even stand there for a second like that. I can't imagine being forced into that position. Of course, if you wear a corset like this, what you wear on the outside is going to be in that same shape. So you can see in this photo, this is actually called a pigeon front, because this was Edwardian time period. And when Almina first became Countess, a few years later, she would be wearing these fashions. And the Edwardian period was, of course, when King Edward was on the throne. And it had sort of like a pouch. They call it a pigeon front. A pouch in the front that sort of looked like a bird breast. And it's called a monobosom as well, because it looks like, excuse me, but one big boob. That's what it looks like. It's just really just one, they're not separate. It just looks like one big breast. And then, so that's called the S-curve. It's also called the monobosom and the pigeon front in the bodice. And it almost looks like a bustle, but it isn't. It's not really a bustle. It's the way the corset forces the rear end to move back. And there are a couple of other examples. I don't know how you feel, but I can feel her pain just looking at her. This was the period of the Gibson girl. If you've ever heard of the illustrator Charles Dana Gibson, he drew beautiful illustrations of his daughters, and they always had this hair piled up high on their heads. And a lot of the advertisements featured women, these women that he drew. And they had that Gibson girl hairdo, very beautiful. And that was the time when they were also wearing hats were starting to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Now with that big hairdo, it was tough to put a giant hat on there, but they eventually would do that. And then as we get into the era where Downton Abbey starts, the hats get really enormous. So you can see that pigeon front and the shape of the dress. That's day wear. This is really exaggerated pigeon front, and then the rear end jutting out, very exaggerated, and that's the way they wanted it. There's one of our favorites. Violet, okay, the Dowager Countess of Downton. I put her up here because she's in the old style. She's not going to be wearing the hip new styles that her, her son and her grandchildren are wearing. She will be wearing from the previous period. Think about your relatives from long ago. Did they really keep up with the fashions as you changed your fashions? Maybe they did, but probably not, right? I think I'm kind of keeping up in a way, but my students at Bay State must say, oh man, get with the program, I'm not buying exactly what they're buying because, I'm just a little bit older than them, so I don't want to, show off too much. So, but, we tend to wear things we're comfortable with, and that's what the older people did back then too. They wore, I remember my meme, when my father's mom, I'm French, and she, the dresses she wore were, even though it was into the 60s and 70s, she was still sort of wearing that 50s style, 60s style. That's just what memes did. So that, I always remember that. But notice the sizes of the hats are still getting quite a bit bigger. And then you see a dress that's much different here, and that's what we're going to be seeing as a change. Okay. The way that change happened is there was a gentleman named Paul Poiret. He became very big in the early 20th century. He was a designer that started designing like no one else. And he was very influenced by the Ballet Russe, which was the Russian ballet that debuted in Paris in 1909. And the Ballet Russe was all about color and these crazy costumes and an Orientalism in the design. And that's what his influence was mainly coming from. was this Oriental design. And he came out with a few items that no one had ever done for women, and one of them was harem pants. And they were also known as Turkish trousers. And you see a scene, and I think it's the next slide. This is actually his tunic dress, one of his tunic dresses. He made something, he claimed to free women from corsets, which isn't really true. Women still wore corsets. They were just much more forgiving, as you'll see in a few slides. So they still wore them. But what he did is he hobbled them at the feet. He made something called a hobble skirt, which became narrower than this and was so narrow the women had trouble taking full steps. And eventually they had to have slits in their garments so that they could walk and they could move. So, women were always repressed in one way or another. You get either up here or down here or someplace. You can't, shoes up to here, I don't know. They can't walk too fast. We might get ahead of the men. That's not a good thing. Okay. If you remember this scene with Sybil, okay? I'm very upset about her, by the way. We know why. Not happy. Anyway, she's in a newer style. Sybil is a little bit more forward-thinking than her sisters, and not Edith so much, but certainly Lady Mary. So she's wearing a set of Turkish trousers that they don't say it's Poiret, but it's inspired by Poiret's design. So I just wanted to show you there's the real thing that Paul Poiret designed. And notice she has something on her head that's similar. I don't know if you can see it because her head is down, but she has sort of this headband, and they'll eventually do a lot of feathers and that kind of thing. So that's that Oriental flair that you see in the dress of this period. Okay, this is a little fuzzy, I apologize for that. But this is a big switch from the S-curve. It's a much straighter, longer line than we've seen. So it's going to be more forgiving. If you remember, if any of you were at the Titanic talk that I did a year ago, or if you've seen the movie Titanic and you think about Rose's dresses, they're not that S shape anymore. They've become much straighter. And that's partly Poiret's influence. Partly, that's why I showed his picture on there, because he was quite influential. There was another designer named Paquin, P-A-Q-U-I-N, also very big into this style, this very lean, straight style. Okay, you don't see the 20s yet, but you can see it going that way. Okay, much straighter. And as I said, the corsets are much more forgiving than they had been, but you still see a pretty narrow skirt on the bottom. Okay, in Downton, you'll see them in day dresses, you'll see them in evening dresses, and if you notice, the evening dresses are usually sleeveless or with a very short sleeve, and then they'll have the long gloves. Well, they mention in the book about Lady Almina that whenever she was dressed for evening, she'd make sure she always had the long, tall, high gloves, usually white gloves in the evening. So you do see that on the ladies in Downton as well, and there's an example of that, okay? There's the four beauties from Downton Abbey. Notice too that this era, this 1912, before World War I era, everything was, I always like to say, it was very diaphanous, it was very filmy and layered, and this dress is a reproduction of that period, but there's a dress under it, a full dress under it, and then a whole dress layer that goes over it. So it's that kind of a thing. They're just multiple very sheer layers that the ladies wore, especially for evening. Day dress you might see a little bit with a little bit more substance to the textiles. But in this case, it's a very good example of that. Hair was worn up. We still see the long hair at this point, but that will change too. And I just wanted to show you a little bit about the summer wear. We don't see a lot of change in the men's fashions, and I don't show a lot of the men. You will see some film clips, so you'll see the men's fashion. But the men's fashion changes so slowly compared to the ladies that, it always seems not boring, but just kind of like, oh man, that's the same old suit we saw last season. Let's get with a little bit of a change here. But the ladies are changing a lot faster. So this is a summer. Usually ladies would wear straw hats, and so would men. Either straw fedoras or boaters, they would call them, which was a flatter top. But the straw hats in the summer, the much lighter fabric, either lawn or something like a very light linen, cotton, but they would still remain in the line of that time. Okay. Try to notice the shoes as well. You can see there's a little heel and they have these straps usually, almost like a Mary Jane style shoe. I just want you to keep that in mind for later. Okay, this is what you would wear as your underpinnings if you were going to wear this particular style. Your corset, you see the difference between that S-curve, I hope, and this one? It's very, very straight and it covers the hips. If you remember the girls, that slide I just showed you, it's a very, very smooth line. Okay, there's not an emphasis on hips, not even an emphasis on a tight waist like there had been. So it's not a really cinched waist in these corsets, but it does cover the hips quite tightly. So that gives that really smooth line, which is what you're seeing here. Okay, and then over that would go a petticoat.
Can I
Yes,
ask you?
sure.
Now, I'm seeing that there are some garters there,
Yes.
and I'm wondering, since they have like looks like a slip or something underneath.
Yes.
How the heck they put
I think that they would actually put they put the petticoat over that. I think just for the ad's sake, so you could see it, and they didn't dare show legs.
I see.
So they had to put something there to make it look. That was a good question, though. You could get one of these lovely things for $1, which probably was kind of a lot of money back then. But if you saw the Titanic lacing scene, when Rose was being laced by her mother rather tightly because she was angry with her, sort of looked like that. And you see how it's a long line? This is a reproduction on the left. But it's a very long line, a lot of laces, a lot of boning, tight. She has, it's interesting that you said, because she has like little drawers or so, almost under there. And you can see they're pulled up so that she could have her stocking on. So that could be what they were trying to show as well. Here you see the petticoat over, and this is a camisole or a corset cover, which they've been using since the century before this, the 19th century. And so this little corset cover would protect the corset and be another undergarment under the dresses. And then that's just it's like a half slip, but they still called it a petticoat. And you notice that they have the hairstyles more in keeping with the Poiret style. And these petticoats were anywhere from $1.29 to $2.48.
So they have a camisole underneath the corset and then a camisole above?
The one above was a corset cover.
Okay.
Yeah, but the cami was just for protection against the skin, and then the corset cover would go over that. And I tried to compare when I could what I found in terms of the real designs of the time and what the ladies of Downton are wearing. And this is Lady Mary, of course, and she's in evening wear with her long black gloves, and her hair is up. But she's miserable, isn't she? I don't know if I take to her yet. She's beautiful, but she just makes me crazy. Okay, she just does. And I don't know if you can see it, but there's sort of a, looks similar to that, what almost looks like it tuxes, you know what I'm trying to say? Cummerbund, thank you. It almost looks like that, and it's very sheer and layered, like my dress is, and that's what it looks like. It's kind of dark, probably hard to see it, but that's what that dress looks like as well. So I'm trying to compare them for you so you can see that they're not doing a bad job on making a very good likeness of what that costume really would have been like. I love this picture on the left. That is this period dress for day wear. Women would promenade. They would wear walking dresses or promenade dresses during the day. It was mentioned that when the Prince of Wales came to Highclere Castle, Lady Almina and her guests would pretty much have at least 4 or 5 clothing changes in a day, because you would wear something in the morning, you'd wear a morning dress, you'd wear an afternoon dress, a walking dress, a tea dress or tea gown, and then evening dress. So this was just one of the many changes that a lady in society would be making on a daily basis. And that's what you're seeing, is that very straight line. And look at the hats. The hats are huge. The hats are huge. And they pretty much double as a parasol. Even though the ladies are carrying parasols by their sides, the whole reason for the parasol wasn't for rain, it was to keep off the sun, because they wanted to keep that white skin. It wasn't yet popular to tan. That comes a little later. So they're trying to keep this, they don't want to freckle. They even had freckle cream to keep, to bleach out the freckles. So they're keeping, the hats are fashionable and a statement at the time, but they're also protective, and so are the parasols. There is one lady carrying one back there, as you can see. But this piece right here with the buttons reminds me of the dress that Rose was wearing when she was boarding the Titanic. Oh, I thought I was going to be competing with 8, but it's only 7:30. Okay. The shoe on the right, on the top, I put that picture up there because I have some shoes up here that I bought at the Sturbridge Vintage Clothing Show a couple weeks ago. And you can come up and see them later, but they have almost the same design on them. And they told me these are from the 20s. This is supposed to be from 1912. This shoe that you're looking at up here is 1912. So, but they didn't have tons of variation. You'll see over these, like from 1900 to 1929, you'll see many of the same styles. In the 30s, you start to see change. But this looks like either a very nice day shoe or an evening shoe. So you can look at these when you come up, but very similar to that. So I couldn't resist putting that up there. And then finally, just to remind you that furs were very important as well. People not only wore fur coats, but fur wraps and stoles with the animals still intact. The tail, the head with the beady little eyes, it's nasty. And if you think about what that is and how women would actually wear these on their backs, it's just what they did. And they also used something called a muff, and a lot of my younger students don't know what those are. But they're hand warmers. I remember them from when I was a little girl, and they were fur as well. They usually matched whatever outfits they were wearing. So that's the fur aspect for outerwear was very important during this time, and will continue to be so in the next couple of decades. Okay. Many women I've talked to, this is their least favorite season because of the whole war thing and how the house was turned into a hospital. How dare they? But that's what was done back during this time. In World War I, people of high society would open up their homes as, a convalescent kind of a home or a hospital setting like we did see in Downton Abbey. And it made some of the residents quite unhappy, but the girls, at least we know Sybil took over and became one of the nurses. And it just, it's important because it was something that was really happening at the time. It's also a good thing to see how the fashion started to change yet again. So we went from S-curve into that straight line, sort of like the dress I'm wearing now, into something that not only starts getting wider, it starts getting shorter. Why would that be? Why would dresses start? You weren't supposed to show your ankles. That was obscene. That just was not something that you did.
War shortages?
Okay, that's one. What else?
Bicycle movement.
Huh? Oh, that's a very interesting one. Actually, bicycles, that in the 1890s, bicycling was a craze. Everybody was riding bikes. So they started to dress a little bit more realistically for that, for sports and for bicycle riding and that kind of thing. But if you're just walking in a shorter dress, the war, yes, shortages could have something to do with it. But what about the fact that some women were doing men's jobs? Okay? And because of that, the style started to become a little bit more practical. Whenever there's a war, you see practicality. Things become a little more utilitarian and people will dress a little bit more just practically, okay? And that's what you start to see there. So you start to see a widening of the silhouette, almost in not a great aesthetically beautiful way, I don't think. But a lot of the fabrics became a lot more utilitarian as well, and just the colors were more drab during the war. And so the practical reasons of more women actually doing men's work at times, and that was reflected in how the skirts were starting to shorten. And they were looser because it didn't make sense to wear a tight dress and a tight corset when you're doing more physical work than you would normally be doing. Also, shoes became doubly important during this time because they showed. So shoes and stockings. If you were at the Jane Austen lecture that I gave last December, I talked about how important the stockings were. And stockings would have embroidery on them because in the beginning, in the Jane Austen period, the early 1800s, the dresses were still long, but they were very sheer muslin. And you could usually see a bit of the stockings and the shoes, so that became important. But this time you really need to show off those shoes because you're seeing the feet for the first time in a long time. Okay? These are some lovely items on the left. It looks like a sack, that woman in the middle. It's just not my favorite period. But this is what women were wearing. And notice how short they are. For the time, that's pretty short. It's kind of risque. And the hats are getting smaller, as you can see, and more practical, and closer fitting, which is going to get even more so later. And you can see that the waistline is changing a little bit, isn't it? 1914 to 1918 was World War I period. And so you're not going to see this higher waist, which we saw during the Titanic era and during the beginning year of Downton Abbey, season 1. You start to see that waist creep down a little bit, okay, till it's at the natural waist, and then even a little lower, but it's still right around the natural waist right now. Okay. These are, of course, outer coats. The other thing about the war period is you're always going to see military influence, always. Whether it's in, epaulettes, whether it's in the style of coats like you see here, the buttons, pockets, that's always going to be shown. There were 3 classic pieces that came out of World War I. Does anybody have any idea?
Wristwatch.
Yes, thank you. Wristwatch is number 1. Men, prior to World War I, had pocket watches. Well, when you're in the trenches, you don't have time to be fooling around reaching for that pocket watch. You have to have something that you can look at right away, and that is where the wristwatch came from. 2 other things.
Trench coat.
Yes, excellent. You get an A for the day. Excellent. Trench coat. It's still around, And one more thing. It's a casual piece of clothing that both women and men wear today.
A vest?
Close.
Cardigan?
Yes, well, a sweater. They called them shakers back then, but the shaker or the sweater or pullover is what, or the Brits would call them jumpers. Yeah, and that came out of World War I as a classic. So I just think that's important to know about this period too. Okay, anybody have any questions about what you've seen so far? I'm going to show you some film clips to go along with this. It'll help. This is season 2, of course, our friends, and I wanted to show you this because you can see that we're moving up towards war period, whereas our friend Violet is still in her Victorian garb, or Edwardian. Yeah, she's not changing, forget it. She's not changing, and don't try to tell her she has to, she won't. But you can see the lines changing quite a bit in the looseness of the clothing for the war period. So that is a good thing to notice there, and the smaller hats. This is the hunting party, the Grantham hunting party, and I showed this because I thought it was interesting with the hat choices for the ladies and the fact that it's so menswear inspired, which you would see both in riding habits and hunting garments on the ladies. They're in skirts, but they're like a men's type fabric and weave, not a feminine look. And that's what you'd see because it was a sporting event. Here's a man he still has his pocket watch. I think you can see one at the left too. And of course they're all wearing hats, both the men and the women. You saw a picture, a little smaller version of this, but season 2, this is, of course, Matthew and his mother, and Lavinia, right? She wasn't around for too long, but she had quite a tragic end, didn't she? And we found out the other night when we had trivia, I hope none of you were sitting at my table because it didn't go well. Couldn't remember that woman's name. How did they get that money? You know, did Downton, was it saved? And we're like, oh, who was it? And it was Lavinia's and the inheritance from her when she died. So we can thank her for that. Okay, so the war fashions, again, just to reiterate a little bit, you do see uniforms on the men, of course, dress uniforms and regular uniforms that you just saw, and you'll also see that very straight line for the ladies, shorter dresses and wider silhouettes, okay? 1919, things start to change yet again. We start to see not only the waistline dropping a little bit more, but you're going to start to see the hemline climbing a little bit more. And that is going to become very, very important for the next decade. So 1919, you start to see a waistline going down, a skirt length rising, and the whole shape is going to start to change and become more boyish. And that is because of a few things that were going on during this time. And I'll tell you about that. But I do have a dress from this period. This is around 1919. And you can see this is the real thing. I don't want to, it doesn't have wheels, but it's fine. If you can see this, you can certainly come up after and look at it. But it is layered. It took me, I don't know how long, to do all of the hooks and eyes, because the hooks and eyes are placed with every layer. So the under layer has hooks and eyes, and then, oh yeah, there's two more over here. And then the upper bodice has hooks and eyes, and so it's just, it's beautiful, but they needed maids to get dressed in the morning. You couldn't possibly put this on yourself. It's impossible. And this cummerbund effect, but going lower, very sheer still. It's a longer sleeve. It's got a lot of this beautiful embroidery in the front, and the back has almost a little, not a bustle, but a little extra piece of fabric that's also embroidered. So the detail on these garments is unbelievable. I mean, the way that they hand sewed and the way that they added to in decoration. It's just so depressing to go to H&M. I can't even go. It's just, when you work with anything vintage and you see a lot of vintage, you're like, I can't buy that. It's just, it's great for what it's used for. It's a throwaway fashion kind of thing. But it's not made the way things back then were made. It's just not. And you know, you have to buy very expensive couture in order to be able to have that kind of quality now. So be sure to come up and see this before you leave tonight, if you would. All right, here we go. Okay. Changes in season 3 is we're hopping forward into the 20s, and this was the era of, we call it the Roaring 20s. What happened in 1920 that made women just go crazy? What happened? What did they get the right to do? Vote. Yes. At the same time, prohibition was going on here, so you start to see the speakeasies and this, you know, even more drinking. People were just, you know, kind of pretending they were drinking tea out of teacups, but they were really drinking booze in these dance clubs. And women felt this new freedom they'd never felt before. And because of that, they not only wore their dresses shorter and shorter, went out dancing, rolled down their hose, wore makeup, necked in cars, they called it necking, necked in cars with boys, and smoked cigarettes out in the open, and cut their hair. And that haircut is called a bob. Sometimes it was straight, sometimes it was wavy. If you saw the new Gatsby, that's the recent version of Great Gatsby, I didn't think I was going to like it because I'm such a purist with the older one, but it was actually quite good, and the costume was wonderful. The haircuts and all of that was very interesting to see. But she's called a flapper. And you know where they got the term flapper from? Anybody know that little tidbit? Who said that? Galoshes.
Yeah, they didn't buckle them, they let them flap.
Exactly. Excellent. Oh, I'm so happy you knew that. Yep. They would flap when the lady would walk. And so they called them flappers because they just didn't tie them, they didn't buckle them up. They just let them flap in the breeze when they were walking. So that's how they got that term flapper. So lots of makeup, short hair, dancing till I don't know what time at night, and doing things like the Charleston. It was the Jazz Age. Fashion-wise, we have this lovely lady to thank for a lot of the changes. Her name was Gabrielle Coco Chanel. That's what she's known as Coco. I love her because she made costume jewelry popular. The ropes of pearls that are mixed in, the real with the faux, the fake jewelry. And excess is never enough kind of thing. A lot of jewelry, it didn't have to be the real thing. She just made it okay to do that. And I really love her for that. She is also known for the little black dress. And I believe 1926 was the first one that she came out with. It was very plain. She believed in women being comfortable. She wanted them to look elegant but comfortable. So she would work with jersey knit. She was the first designer to work heavily in knits. And she would have these two-piece, like long tunic sweater type garments over skirts that matched. So that was a very big thing for her, was to work with jersey. And you see a lot of that type garment in season 2 in Downton. I'm sorry, season 3. Bob haircut. She also cut her hair short. And she, along with the increase in women's participation in sports, suntanning became acceptable finally in the 20s. And Coco Chanel was a leader in that, because she let herself get tan, and that was, helped make it become popular. So suntanning was something that the ladies, it was okay. So now when you see beach wear, you see much more skin in the 20s. They didn't cover up. Before, they wore black stockings and these combat boots in the water and, covered from head to toe, usually in black. Now you see more color, you see more skin, because it was okay to get some sun, finally. So that's Miss Chanel. In the 20s, you start to see, as I said, that waistline goes lower and lower and the skirt gets higher and higher. The shortest it ever was about 1926. That's when it was right about at the knee, maybe a little above the knee, and then it started to come down again a little bit later in the decade. This is the jersey type garments I was telling you about that Chanel inspired. The tunic, the very low, long tunic over the skirt. Those are day dresses that are a little fancier. And you can see whenever there's a decoration, it's always at the hip level. So whether it's like a belt type tie or just a decorative addition, it's at the hip level, not at the true waist. And notice that they look very, very boyish. That was the idea. The short hair, the fact that they have freedom and that they're able to go out and vote like men, they sort of wanted to dress that way too. They're not wearing, some women wore pants, but most women still wore dresses or skirts, but they were much, much shorter. And women who felt they had to would bind their breasts so that they wouldn't have, they could have that more boyish and straight figure in the front. Okay? So the other thing that you see, this short hair, as I said, either wavy or straight, and they would wear these very close-fitting hats called cloches. The cloche hat is almost a skull cap right to the head. And sometimes you could see hair and sometimes you couldn't. So it was another decoration, and you see a lot of that in Gatsby as well. And who is this? That's Rose. Rose is our flapper from Downton Abbey season 3. Wonderful garments. She has the headband that was all the rage in the 20s. You can see she has some kind of a long necklace on. I wish they had shown the bottom of this. I could not find a picture of the whole dress, but it would have been a short dress. She wore beaded dresses at night. Definitely the character who was the flapper in the series. So that's Rose. And then, of course, we have Edith's wedding dress, and the girls are in very good fashions that are closer to that period with the picture hats, but I just wanted to throw the wedding dress in there. I can't remember the year she got married. Does anybody know? What was the year supposed to be? Do you remember? Because I can't. I blanked right out on that. But anyway, she's certainly not in the early season. That looks very much like a 20s type dress that she has on. Edith on the left here is in a Chanel-inspired jersey knit outfit. Okay, so the tunic over, it looks like a couple of layers, or a two-layered skirt with the buttons all the way down. It's quite interesting, with the smaller hat. And then up here you still see Violet in her old ways, old dress. And then you see the girls in much more relaxed styles up here with the short hair. you'll see more of this in the 30s, but you start to see this, what they call the Marcel wave, which is really kind of a pretty hairstyle, and you see that on Edith for sure. She was kind of a forward, very much a forward thinker as well. And then on the bottom you see evening wear with Lady Mary in that, and you can see a lower waist there for her. And you can see the shoes. The shoe tended to have that Louis heel during this period as well. There you go. There's Cora's mom. She was, I have a clip to show you of Violet and when they meet again and what they say to each other, and it's just wonderful, such a wonderful scene. But they look so funny together because one is the extreme of the new fashion and Violet is the extreme of the old ways. And it just doesn't work. It's just talk about a clash, you know, physical clash and you know, mentally and all of that. So, but she's wearing a very typical 20s coat with a fur trim. That's very, very, you'd see a lot of that sort of metallic brocade look. That's typical. And look at the hat. Very interesting 20s hat. She has red lipstick, which the daring 20s flappers would wear. I don't know if she smoked, but if so, she probably would have had a cigarette holder. I don't remember if they ever showed her with that. And I mean, at the wedding, you can just see the definite, she's still in the pigeon front from the Edwardian period, and here she is with her furs and her cloche and her feathers in the hair and the hat. So very interesting. And there's another older woman back there who's also in the same type garments as Violet. Gotta love it. Okay, this is definitely that same period, of course, the 20s. And look at the Marcel wave on Cora, and even a little bit on Shirley MacLaine's character. Art Deco, as I mentioned earlier, with the whole Egyptian, the discovery of the tomb, and with the decorative arts exhibition in France, in Paris, and that's how Art Deco came to be the term used. And it tends to follow very geometric lines. And as I said, you don't just see it in garments, you see it in the line of accessories, like you can see here, a lot of geometrics there. You see it in buildings. Think about the Chrysler building in New York. All of those, you see those kinds of patterns in prints and in designs on garments as well. Okay, so you definitely notice that when you're looking at anything from the 1920s. So I definitely wanted to give you a few examples of that. I happen to have a purse. Again, you can come up. This is borrowed from a friend. And it's the real thing from the 20s. Beautiful, beautiful painted, hand-painted bag. And the ladies couldn't carry very much because they're too busy. They're dancing, they're, you know, the only thing they would carry here is money and lipstick and maybe a little bit of rouge if they dared. So they really wouldn't carry much in there, and they wanted to have something very decorative. So that's the kind of bag they would have carried.
That's a Mandelian.
Yes, it is.
It was made right here in Plainville?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, my boss, the chair of the department where I teach at Bay State, that's her bag, and she wanted me to sell it on eBay. And I was telling Chris earlier, I just couldn't do it. I tried a couple of times. I couldn't meet the reserve, and I'm not giving that away. And you know, I didn't want to, you know, have somebody bid $20 and I had to give it. No, so I haven't done it yet. So I'm still borrowing it. Had to show you this. This was too great. That's a typical 20s dancing shoe. Remember, shoes have to be comfortable. You're dancing in the 20s. You're doing the Charleston. If you've ever seen people do the Charleston and some of the other dances that they did during that period, or a little earlier than that was the tango, was all the rage. You have to be comfortable. Even though there's a heel, it has to be a supportive dancing shoe with straps. And that's what you're seeing there. Sort of looks like almost like the dance shoes or ballroom shoes we might wear now if you do that kind of dancing. But I don't know if you can see it well. It's a little bit blurry. These are shoes with a place for your lipstick tube. I said, I'm going to be on the hunt for a pair of those. I'm going to find them. I don't know how, but I'm going to find them. So, but it's so incredible. It's just this little big, just that big. So if a woman didn't want to carry anything with her, she just wanted to go unfettered, she could. She'd have her little lipstick right there, and that's it. So I just thought that was fabulous. You could see the straps are very you know, a lot of support you'd have. And there's even something high up here to hold the lipstick, but to give more support. I just thought that was priceless. And then I'm finishing in terms of the slideshow with Lady Mary's dress with the low waist. It's not, we were talking about it the other night, last week here, and I mean, I tend to like the embellished dresses. This just doesn't do it for me. But, you know, it's Lady Mary. What are you going to do? You have to kind of go with the flow and let her do what she wants to do. But anyway, that's, I'm not happy about him either. Not happy. Okay, I am going to just show you, I hope I have time, a few, how long do I have, Chris? All right, beautiful. I have 3 clips to show you, and I saved it to the end because I didn't want to keep interrupting the slideshow for it. I knew you would want to see Downton in action, not just on a screen, on a flat screen. You've got to hear them speak. You have to see them move around in their fashion. So I thought I would show you a couple of things, but the first thing I'm showing you is something I found by chance on the internet, and I got such a kick out of it, so I have to show this. It's fashions from I want to say, I think it's 14 to 29. And yes, it is 14 to 29, and it's real models from the period. It's hilarious. It just struck me so funny. I said, I have to show them this because this is the real thing from the period. So, Lady Duff Gordon was mentioned in the movie Titanic. She was a designer from that period. A far cry from the runway shows of today. The war period. That music's a killer, isn't it? Check this out. Now we're going in.